Good afternoon. I think we can slowly get started with our panel for today. My name is Florian Bieber. I will be the moderator of this panel. I'm a professor for Southeast European history and politics at the University of Graz and the coordinator of the Balkans and Europe Policy Advisory Group. This is our part of the panel in part of this civil society forum in the context of the Berlin process conference taking place also today. And the topic of the panel is reconciliation, social dialogue, and regional confidence building. And we have a really excellent panel for today of both a presentation of the key recommendations from the civil society dialogue by Branka Vierda, who is the program coordinator of the Justice Program and Reconciliation Program of the Youth Initiative for Human Rights in Croatia. And then we have three speakers who can reflect on those recommendations and suggestions. Gordana Čomić, who is the Minister for Human and Minority Rights and Social Dialogue in Serbia, Donika Gërvalla-Schwarz, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Diaspora in Kosovo, and Hani, the Secretary General for the Regional Youth Cooperation Office, who will join us shortly. And of course, this is supposed to be an interactive event, so you're all able to ask questions. You can do this in two ways. You can raise your hand and you can ask a question via audio. And I'm now glad to also welcome Hani, who has joined us now. And as well as ask questions in the Q&A function. So the Q&A is open throughout the whole session. We have 1 hour, so we have to be very tight with our time management. So I'll ask everybody, also the question askers, to be brief in their questions, not overly complicated, and focused on the topic of our panel. And I will be posing those questions from the Q&A to our panelists. Questions which people would like to ask live, I will give a floor to them in due course. So this roughly to the procedures, and without further ado, I'll hand over to Branka to hear what are the key suggestions which came out of the discussions in the Civil Society Forum. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Florian. Good day, everyone. It's really an honor to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So the recommendations forum and group which discussed issues regarding legacies of the past and regional confidence building were structured in three pillars. First pillar addressed CSOs and think tanks from the Western Balkans. Since all the participants were very much aware of the complexity and length of peace building and trust processes for post-conflict societies, recommendations for CSOs and think tanks contributions were firstly to be persistent in their work and to develop multidisciplinary cooperation in their respective peace building efforts. Adding new types of partners, such as academic institutions, is one of the suggestions. The availability of facts and data are a necessary condition for strong and relevant advocacy and base for the truth-seeking process. During the discussion for creating the second pillar recommendations for Western Balkans governments, it was pointed out that development of sustainable peace is a process which needs to include national as well as regional level of efforts, which should be mutually inclusive. Moreover, when we talk about building regional confidence, we need to talk about a regional perspective, which includes Croatia, Albania, Slovenia as well. One of the ways on how to achieve common goals based on international human rights standards is to create multilateral public policies and reconciliation agendas, which will comprehensively represent a recognition of the importance and a strong commitment to fostering social development through values of peace and responsible dealing with the past. Also, we found very relevant the need for strong support of critical journalism in respective countries in providing the public with uncensored information about atrocities and human rights violations that occurred during recent conflicts in the region. Finally, the working group during the forum created recommendations for the EU and its member states, emphasizing that they should encompass transitional and restorative justice mechanisms in the EU policies of conditionality towards candidate states. Working group pointed to the relevance of imposing zero tolerance for hate speech and attacks on peace activists and the media, and providing targeted grants for cross-border and regional programs to support joint reconciliation and peace-building activities. For the conclusion, very important recommendation is to include non-judicial dimensions of transitional justice, such as reparations, truth-seeking and memorialization during the monitoring period, in conjunction with criminal justice measures. It is crucial that the peace-building process and responsible dealing with the past is followed by a concrete, sincere, active and effective push by national institutions to truly recognize and develop public policies oriented toward building sustainable peace. Thank you.
Great, Branka, thank you so much for your reporting on the recommendations. And now I would like to give all of our other panelists a brief chance to pick up on some of the themes and recommendations and respond. So I would go in the order as noted in the program and give a floor to Gordana Čomić. So please, Gordana, the floor is yours.
Thank you. As brief as I can be, I will share with you something what we have been sharing in a second ministerial meeting on Roma inclusion in Sarajevo, but also in Prespa Digital Forum recently on Ohrid, just at the end of the weekend. And that is that in no text without a context, what we live in this region is more often just absence of war than building peace. And the absence of war is good if you compare it with war, but it's not good if you just are stuck in absence of war, because that is connected with transition of hate. And in that context, you should have strategies for peace building in the field, because governments can sign agreements, contracts, whatever, but only people in the field can really make peace, and we are not there yet. With transition of hate, we need a huge dialogue where civil society is indispensable, because they know how to fight that transition of hate much better than politicians or governments do. So that's, from my perspective, is context. And the tool for maybe speed up the processes that are good in that context, absence of war and transition of hate, and trying to resolve each one another's issue on the account of each other instead of working together, is to talk about something that, for example, women and Roma people know very well, and that's patronizing. There is a phrase coined, mansplaining. For all my life, I was listening to men telling me about the things that I know much better, and telling me what to do and how to behave and what is my role. And the same things happen with non-Roma splaining. And I think there is a resemblance of that process in trying to impose a peace without really original effort put by all the governments, all the state or non-state actors with the goal to have an ownership of peace building in the region. And the second thing that we should work on, from my perspective, except that patronizing, is to really start dialogue on what in this dialogue we will never mention to make dialogue possible. First phase that I call non-agenda issues. And then as dialogue goes, to introduce those issues from non-agenda that would enable the space of people who can't very often stand each other, really can sit in the same room with CEOs, with citizen associates, with whoever they feel accountable if they belong to any government, and do their job. And that is building confidence, and that is sharing the same picture of the future of this region in 5, 7, 10 years, 3 years, whenever. That is something what I shared in Prespa Forum, and that is that my plea is to everyone in the region that the famous speech that Martin Luther King shared with us did not start with "I have a nightmare," but "I have a dream." We should be dream builders. However, there is a lack of trust between government and CEOs and governments mutually among themselves and small alliances, etc. But the process of transforming absence of war in building peace process is inevitable. The process of decreasing the transition of hate from generation to generation is something that is common task for everyone living in this region. And sharing the dream of this region in 2030 and pushing for ownership with simple question: why anyone from Berlin or Netherlands or America, why anyone from there know better how my kids should live in 2030? Why don't we imagine the life in Southeast Europe, in Western Balkans, in the 10 or 9 years from now? This is something what I deeply believe in, that is possible. This is something what our ministry is tool for. However, it is hard. However, there are a lot of non-believers around, but we will never give up, because the alternative is that we just do as we've been doing for decades and hundreds of years, so the outcome will be the same. We want the different outcome for this region, that is European non-hating environment, accountability of the politicians, dialogue as a process that nobody really likes, but is the only tool for building up democracy in our region. Okay, thank you very much, Gordana. Less West-splaining, I guess, would be the term, instead of mansplaining and non-Roma-splaining, as well as more dialogue in the region, even when it's difficult. And I guess the I had a dream reference also means a certain future-oriented dialogue. So let's hear now from Donika Gërvalla-Schwarz for your response to the recommendations made by Branka. Please, the floor is yours. Please just unmute yourself. Yes, that's my main recommendation.
From the recommendations, you see very clear that two things are important in the Western Balkans. First of all, the reconciliation. But reconciliation means starting finally to talk about the truth, and on the basis of the truth to start the reconciliations process. When I take as example the Balkan Youth Exchange, that is built along the example of the French-German exchange that started 18 years after the end of the Second World War. So before that, civil society, churches, series of local partnerships, youth organizations, and many others built the trust. The trust has been built on facts, not on false narratives and lies. There was no hate speech against any other group, just the contrary. Reconciliation has to be based on truth. Even if the truth might be inconvenient, it is still the truth. And facing the truth, reconciliations become much more easy. Because every reconciliation based on false narratives or even lies cannot work. There is no example anyway in Europe or in the world where they would work. So my appeal today, based on the recommendations, is let's work on reconciliation. Yes, let's work full scale on that. And yes, let's work on talking the truth. That is what Chancellor Merkel said yesterday about the Western Balkans, that it is necessary to talk about that, what happened. She knows from her own nation's experience it works. The German reconciliation efforts has been a huge success. So we should not neglect these lessons of that huge success story. Instead, we should start to work on that.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this is picking up an important recommendation about how to deal with hate speech, but also how to actually give there's the looking forward and the looking backwards. I mean, looking backwards in a particular way, which I think is an important question. So with that, I would give the floor to Albert Hani to reflect from the perspective of RICO and the work they've been doing over the last years.
Thank you very much, Florian. I'm really happy to hear the recommendations, focusing also on some of the taboo topics, let's say, as transitional justice, but also sensitive topics that deserves to be tackled in this period of reconciliation in the region. The region deserves to provide the youth the dream that was mentioned by Mrs. Gordana, a dream for a peaceful region that is in fact freed from all types of ethnocentrism, nationalism, and freed from stereotypes and prejudices. This is what youth are requesting all over the region in all the processes that are related to them. We have, as RICO, a great responsibility in front of us, the responsibility actually of not disappointing young people by missing chances and repeating the same mistakes as we have done in the past. Therefore, we appreciate that your recommendations focus also, as I said, on the transitional justice, but also in the dealing with the past. Our latest researches show that youth are in fact seeing their future outside of the Western Balkans. 52% they really want in a way to show that they are ready to vote with their feet. It also our researchers show that there are low rates of youth involvement in decision-making processes, and therefore I'm glad that you work on the issues of communication and hate speech as well as involving the youth. Low trust of young people in governments and civil society is very, it is very low, the trust in government and civil society, but also young people are showing their hopes for better regional relations. And that's why I'm glad that this forum is bringing together all the key stakeholders that are responsible for making a better regional relations and address, of course, the needs and desires of the youth. So as RICO, we are welcoming all the recommendations and hoping to hear them in today's summit that will happen later in the afternoon. Otherwise, let me just use this opportunity and say that it's the 5th birthday of RICO, and we are happy to announce that we've been successful in providing more than 10,000 exchanges for youth, and we supported over 300 secondary schools and civil society organizations with over 3 million euro, not just an investment coming from the governments of Western Balkans, but also with their willingness. This shows symbolically the willingness that the governments are ready to move forwards in terms of reconciliation and peace. That is also the key word in this forum. Therefore, for the end, let me use this opportunity to appeal to all the countries of Western Balkans to ensure that these key recommendations that you have provided will be implemented smoothly. Thank you very much, Florian, and all the others.
Great, thank you very much. I would take it maybe back to Branka. Maybe you can also, because we've looked at the overall picture, let's maybe see what concrete measures could be done across the region from your side in the discussions to deal with issues of, dealing with the past, hate speech, ensuring a dialogue, a constructive social dialogue between the societies. So they, I think, would be appreciate to get some ideas, and then I can ask the other participants to respond and see also what ideas they might have of how to actually put those overall challenges into practice in the coming years. So Branka, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you, Florian. First of all, and first what comes to my mind is support to establishing RECON. That is something that is I believe all of us who work in civil societies from whole the region, establishing RECOM and existing RECOM is something that could really help to provide not just dialogue, but for all the mechanisms of transitional justice to be seen and to be heard. That kind of truth commission is something that would be very useful for this region to maybe not to say to start, but to gain reconciliation. As Ms. Schwarz said, reconciliation must be built on truth, and we have to know the truth in order to gain reconciliation. Reconciliation agendas, which will provide not just a set of laws, but measures which are included in wider transitional justice programs, is something that all the governments can do, and that is something that then has an opportunity to be followed in our respective countries. For these two so to say measures, acts are something that can be done, and as you can see, I'm mentioning all the regional perspective, because I honestly believe if we have only exclusively national measures, then we cannot succeed in reconciliation in the wider sense, in a regional sense, and that is something that I truly believe it's a basic condition in order to gain a peace building, trust process, and the reconciliation process.
Thank you, Branka. And I would go to Gordana to also ask you that question in a certain way. Specifically, is a RECOM on the agenda? Is this something which can be achieved with support of the Serbian government? It's been on the agenda for a long time, and when will its time come? And I would also bring in the question which Visa Jambazi asked. I mean, in a certain way, what measures can governments do in the case of Serbia to deal with the past? I mean, to investigate past war crimes from the 1990s. The ICTY has come to its end, so that tool is no longer available to look at past crimes. So what can, besides the support for RECOM, what can be done in Serbia also to look at the past in a critical, reflective way? And I guess the same question we can ask across the region, of course. But Gordana, why don't you go ahead with that?
ICTY was, from my perspective, back in the late 90s, a tool for transitional justice, for creating a space where we could talk on facts from verdicts, from what has happened in that court. And unfortunately, it didn't happen. And ICTY actually, maybe the word is blunt, that he failed to use the ICTY work as a tool for reconciliation. It just didn't work. And if you try to introduce what has happened in that court, whoever was indicted, 46 from extradited from Serbia or from Croatia or from Bosnia, or now with special chamber for Kosovo, you will only have a success in interpretation and different interpretation of the facts, and very little, if any, dialogue on what has happened in ICTY. And that is something hard to say, but comparing to domestic judiciary that had very few cases with justice given, and more unsolved processes where you don't know who committed war crime, or the investigation isn't over yet. The truth about what has happened with the judiciary, whether ICTY or domestically, is that we learned how deep the gap between rule of law and justice can be. And I'm not sure that there is a sense of justice given for victims. And I'm not sure that it will happen after the special chamber ends its work. But I don't think that it should prevent us to have a dialogue on data that are applicable and can be an issue for us regionally. The final goal, to, maybe this is idealistic what I will share with you, but that's who I am. With a common monument, a mark somewhere in the region for all those human beings who died, however the horrible way to die was, just to gather around about them being dead. Maybe that will never happen, but I will never stop believing that we are capable of coping with the past if we are decisive in creating a different future. If we are not having a strong decision to have a different future than compared to our past, then it will happen, and we all know the outcome. I don't believe that it is high probability, so I will continue to fight for what I deeply believe in, that are people, they are not nationality, they are victims, and whoever committed that crime and personally is responsible, and that is the space for the governments, for the civil society, for association, for the association with the missing persons that is still a living pain in this region, to talk about what is going to happen next. That is reconciliate, that future-oriented reconciliation, that I think is possible.
So, I mean, specifically, do you see RECOM as being an initiative which could enjoy the support of the Serbian government to become a reality? This is, I think, the most concrete suggestion on the table for dealing with exactly the problems you've mentioned, namely the issue that the courts cannot do the job of finishing the job of transitional justice. So and so the only regional initiative we really have on the paper is RECOM. So is this something which you see could gather the support on the Serbian side to be established finally as a process?
I had an idea, still have, and working on it. I think that we all regionally should together on adopting a regional charter on human rights that will include all participants, including RECOM, because this is something what we have to do regionally, like that missing persons should be problems that should be resolved based on the coordinates that the person was last seen alive, not belonging to anyone or being a victim of someone already convicted. So I would like to see what RECOM has as a database and what they have as an excellent work throughout the years, not just welcomed by the government, but being a foundation for the follow-up. So for something what the governments in the region can do on regional cooperation, in giving space for some sense of justice, implementing rule of law. And I know how hard it is, and I know how very few will say that, yeah, this is justice accomplished. It will never be, but that is not the reason that we should stop. Just to give an example, I also proposed and will fight for it that the governments work on regional charter on anti-Gypsyism, because these tragedies, these people who are human beings who are patronized or seen just as the victims of some ethnic origin, we share that. And if we share them, then we should share a common effort to resolve the problems that their families still have, the pain, the sense of loss that they share, because that's a human thing to do. And I think the RECOM should, as other organizations, should be the part of it. But we have to take responsibility as a government.
Okay, thank you very much. So Donika, Gërvalla-Schwarz, can you also maybe see, how do you see Kosovo's participation in RECOM? Is this something which is a tool for what you were looking at, is talking about what, the truth, finding the truth and engaging in transitional justice mechanisms regarding it? Is this something which you would support and your government would support? I'm sorry, you're muted again.
Right. Regional initiatives are really very welcomed, above all in our region, in the Western Balkans. Yes, we need the reconciliation. We should not stick to the past and should look in the future. But we should not forget that between the past and the future is the presence. And maybe I tell you now something about the presence of the country in which I live. I have a vice president of the parliament who has been 13 years old, who is now a woman, and who has faced the killing of her mother, her sister, brother, grandmother, aunt, and cousins. And she was saved brought to the hospital with 16 bullets in her body. Now she is the vice president of Kosovo, and in the present, not in the past, she asks everybody together with us for justice. We have mothers waiting for the missing persons just to have a place where they can put flowers. So that's not an interpretation, that's not history, but that's the presence of our people every day. That's why it's so important, so really important. First, to talk tough about the facts, and second, to make the steps that are needed just to build the bridge between the past and the future. What is the presence? It depends on how we behave today, if the reconciliation will be successful, and not that much what happened in the past, because the past we cannot change, but we can change the presence. Every one of us can change our behavior now. We have a neighbor who has started 4 wars in the region. In Bosnia and Kosovo committed genocide. So it's very important to accept the truth and just to give the victims the feeling that they are being understood, and that it's not a question of interpretation, but of the reality that happened years ago. What is apologizing important? Because it gives in the present the feeling that we can go together in the future. As long as this does not happen, it will be the same story every year.
Thank you. So do I take, I mean, besides the point you've raised as well, do I take your statement as also saying that you and the Kosovo government would or consider endorsing RECOM, because again, this is the as I've said, the regional proposal from civil society for years to actually engage in a truth-finding process, which would be regional and which would help bring about some kind of transitional justice. I think. So is this how I can see your statement, as that this might be something your government supports and considers?
As far as we are talking about regional cooperation, we support this and the other initiatives when Kosovo is considered as being equal part of the initiatives. When we look at the experience until now, I must say that the experience is not that, makes me not that optimistic, because still in the region, there are the tendencies to block each other on the way we should go together. So at the same time, maybe with my limited English, I should tell you about the initiatives that our government will start in the country itself, not only regional, just to make sure that Albanian and non-Albanian Kosovars have a better cooperation, have better contacts, have common actions they are taking, so that the civil society in the country and regional, and there I see RECOM too, should prevent, above all for young people, the future that they want to build together with the others.
Okay, thank you. Albert, I don't know if RECOM has figured on the discussions of RICO, or how do you see, because I'm sure you have, of course, engaged and are aware of RECOM. So maybe you can say us how you see maybe how these initiatives could interlock. I know RICO is more about exchange in a certain way, forward looking, but do you have a sense of how this kind of looking backwards can interlink like a piece of puzzle you have on your logo with the work RICO does?
Yeah, thank you, Florian. I mean, dealing with the past, it is one of our core topics that actually derives from the needs and desires of the youth. As I mentioned previously, youth are waiting from us to see changes, and those changes really need to be tackled seriously. I like the recommendation to regionalize this type of measures, as well as I would add here to the expectation to see more synergies in all regional initiatives, and to come up with even better, more creative measures and tools that in fact are working seriously on the aspect of reconciliation and peace in the region. We are in need to provide space to youth to see their future in fact in the region. Therefore, for these initiatives, I would welcome all the courage needed to overcome all the barriers from the past and work literally for a better future of the youth and work for the better region. As our motto is already saying, a better region starts with youth. Please also don't forget in these aspects the concept of youth and youth in general. Thank you very much, Florian, and I will have to leave because I need to go to the other conference.
Yes, thank you for your contribution, Albert, and joining us despite I know you have to go to the summit itself. So good luck with that. And let's go back to Branka, because I mean you had other suggestions as well. I mean, one of the topics you've picked up, I mean, and you feel free to add anything else, but one thing I've noticed, and which of course we all know is a problem in a number of countries in the region, is hate speech. You know, kind of often very aggressive speech against particular groups in society. Is this something also where you have explored more specific suggestions, which you can communicate to the two ministers present for consideration by the governments?
Thank you, Florian. Yes, so we talked a lot about hate speech in our respective countries, but maybe something to say before I say about hate speech. I must point, although I'm sure all of us here and respective audience knows that, but I think that it is relevant to say it and to mention it again, that the governments bear biggest burden on responsible dealing with the past processes. NGOs are in that sense partners, and NGOs have limited capacity, organizational, with funding and so on and so on. So we are human rights watchdogs, we are advocates, but we cannot make serious changes in our countries. RICO, Franco-German Youth Office, are a great example is how to make some progress when states and governments are really interested in make a serious change in order to make youth exchange, for example, to make it happen, and how and what is the relevance of this kind of measures, this kind of actions to provide young people to go go to neighboring countries and so on. Regarding hate speech, that is something what we were talking about during the working groups. Also relevant for governments and for politicians to contribute to processes with sustaining of denying war crimes and the fact that were established before ICTY or before national courts. That is something very concrete and very possible to happen when we talk about transitional justice mechanisms and when we talk about peace building. If we don't have if they don't believe in what was established before ICTY, before a national course, then it's very hard to expect for broader public to know what actually happened and then to build trust.
Great, thanks, Branka. Yeah, I would pass the floor to Gordana on that. I mean, we have the issue, as you probably also noticed, with dissatisfaction, that we have newspapers, for example, in Serbia, some tabloids, when Ratko Mladic's verdict was confirmed, who said that he was a hero, which clearly goes against the findings of the court by a stretch. So how can one confront these kind of hate speeches which glorify war criminals, no matter where they're from? But how can we tackle this both nationally as well as regionally in a certain way to make sure that glorification of war crimes is not socially acceptable and not part of the media landscape, as we still do find it in quite a number of countries in the region?
Hate speech is not freedom of speech, that's obvious. But the hardest part in politics is to explain the obvious. So if you read and listen to that process of glorification, whoever of ours was sent to Hague is a hero, and they're the criminals. It goes across the region. Mine are beautiful and yours are ugly. It has nothing to do with the facts. It's on the edge where the hate speech is, and unfortunately it will take time. And it requires an effort from each of us to intervene. And my interventions often goes in this way. If you look at the language, whatever the language may be, Croatian, Bosniak, Montenegrin, Albanian, Serbian, you will see that the wordings is the same, exactly the same, or what they love to hate. And they have difference on picking the war criminals, indicted war criminals, to be described gloriously. That is the same. But the next step is they agree in language, the same people. They agree in language when they use hate speech for Roma people, for migrants, for women. There's no a single letter of difference in the group of people all around the region picking the hate speech to address the public, especially on social media or in tabloids or in what sometimes goes as harsh rhetoric between or among political parties. So I wondered quite often, why do they do that? They don't gain anything. It's not a benefit for everything. And I found out that the hate speech amuses all those who pick it as a way to communicate. And then what can you do? Same with the laws on anti-discrimination. Laws on anti-discrimination cannot ban people being biased, having prejudice among someone slightly different than themselves, to negatively define with hate speech, with harassment, with whatever. But what anti-discrimination laws do are banning behavior based on your own prejudice. And we can work together, I think, to find the framework, the law framework, how not to endanger freedom of speech, which hate speech is not part of, but to find out that we have the same haters. And the fact that they hate me and me hate them does not really make a difference. Maybe we should make a vocabulary of regional hate speech and try to ask people who like that vocabulary simple why. They will answer why not and continue to use that. And I think that some regulations, together with the campaign in media and with the answers in social media, should decrease the level and the fuel and the fire, nasty fire that they often start on social media or in public.
I think these are excellent points. I mean, I think the challenge though is, I mean, I think comes back to Branka's point, the responsibility, of course, for this lies with governments to be very clear about what is acceptable and unacceptable speech. I mean, of course, there's the legal element, but there's also the political message. And we do find that, including members of your government, which are quite ambiguous about talking about war criminals. So I think, the signals has to come from governments in that sense. I mean, besides the education of the public and media, to kind of unequivocally call a sentenced war criminal a war criminal, and not to kind of question this. And I think this is where we have, which creates an atmosphere where it becomes more possible to actually, for media then to, interview people who are at the ICTY who are released, to give them a public profile, a positive public profile. So I think this is really the challenge of how to make this unacceptable, that somebody who was sentenced for serious crimes cannot become a public personality in the countries after their release. Because again, this is the legacy of the ICTY we have now, of people who are free, men and women, who are not, of course, it's legitimate that they are free, but it's a problem when they become heroes and celebrated for the crimes they committed and for which they were sentenced. So I think there's a lot of space there of governments to be more forceful and clearer on that. I would like to ask the same question to Donika Gërvalla-Schwarz about this issue of how to deal with hate speech, because again, also this is something which is also, of course, a challenge in Kosovo, and what can be done regionally to confront it, especially by governments.
I think that the first important thing is building true democracies in our countries, where you protect the freedom of speech, but at the same time, when you have democratic structures, when you have governments who are not corrupted, when you have in government people who are not criminals, and that is the first and more important step that the countries, our region, should take. We have a new government in Kosovo, and we try to be very serious about the promises we gave, and to install a true democracy. The results will we see all together in the next months and years. But freedom of speech is not to be president of one country and to call the indictment of Ratko Mladic as something what is unjust to the Serbs, because other criminals are maybe not, or so-called criminals, or whatever. What do I want to say with this is we have to make the difference between the tabloids, the newspapers, and presidents and ministers and governments when they talk about war crimes. As long as this does not happen, that what you mentioned, Florian, that governments should play the more important part, and to make a true difference between the freedom of speech and between the hate speech against others, and at the same time glorifying criminals, war criminals who committed the worst crimes people can imagine. And so it's not just that everybody that we have are so common in the region when we talk about others, but it's very clear. Facing the past seems for some of our neighbors a really big challenge. And as soon as this starts to face the past and take the conclusions, not just for themselves, but for the neighbors too. When that happens, that the region will have a real boost on democratization and on regional cooperation, because that's what's missing in the moment.
So Donika, just one quick question, but if one had a regional initiative to deal with hate speech, for example, I would also imagine, because this is something which Branka was talking about, maybe to have a regional effort to also say, let's collectively not talk about, war criminals as heroes. This is something which Kosovo presumably would also be part of, because again, the responsibility is everywhere, and I don't want to say, who's more and who is less. I mean, there is variation, but it's not only one country. It happens in several countries that there is hate speech, and that there is also what Gordana was mentioning, hate speech against minorities. These things happen across the region, of course, across Europe. I don't want to say the region is in any way special by that. I don't want to be West-splaining, as Gordana was suggesting we should be careful about.
Yes, but that's a global problem of the new medias that have occurred. And that's something that we should take very serious. And that's something where Kosovo will take the responsibility very seriously about changing that in the regional and other initiatives, but in the country themselves at the same time. But this is nothing we can change in making equal all the sides in neglecting the truth and talking about the past and the present as if we are not witnesses of what has happened. Why do I say that? Because talking like that all sides are equal and everybody does that, makes it very different to make the changes that we need. We have to be tough, we have to be frank, and we have to put the finger on the wound. And as far as we are not doing that, it will be really difficult to show to young people that being to criticize yourself is a very healthy process. Because if we tell our youth that everything is the same, then it's no difference and no reason to go forward.
Thank you. But I think the point is really it always has to be from oneself or one's own society. I think these processes are always, so it doesn't help to say for outsiders to point fingers. I mean, we have to establish historical facts. That's important. But I think these processes of dealing with confronting it has to come from the outside, from the inside, from societies themselves. But I would like to give Branka for the last 4 minutes a chance to raise any final points she would like to raise to our two ministers, and to give the two of you a chance to respond to that. Branka, please.
Thank you, Florian. I will be very brief. When we talk about, and try to wrap it up a little bit. Yeah. So when we talk about regional confidence, I think we all must be aware that laws have limited power if they are not contextualized with concrete policies, including non-legal measures such as commemorations, truth commissions, reparations, either material or symbolic ones. I want to say it has to be a holistic approach, which represents responsible, but before everything, honest will to reconcile in order to respect each victim, no matter the nationality or ethnicity.
Great, thank you, Branka, for this remark. Gordana, Donika, I would give each of you 1 or 2 minutes for your last observation, and then unfortunately there would be so much more need to talk about this topic, but the time is limited. So Gordana, why don't you go ahead, and then Donika has a chance to also state something, and then we'll wrap it up.
It's up to us to decide we want a common future or not, and it's up to us to choose strategy and tactics, how we can reach a common future that everybody equally dislikes or likes. That goes under the umbrella of rule of law, culture of political dialogue, culture of human minority rights, and culture of compromising. And all those issues are not dear to many hearts in the region. But I think there is a critical mass of people who are devoted to such an approach. And there are obvious changes that already happened, whoever wants to admit or not, in each of our countries and societies that give us room to really start the future-oriented dialogue, never forgetting the past, and taking care only of the generation on which life will influence with decision, political one, and by the government now here. And that's why I agree on the holistic approach. when dealing with conflicts is in question. And that's why I'm in, because I don't want anyone else to do the job that I think that I'm capable for. And I would like to see much more women dealing with our context and having their rightful half of the future debated within the region. I think that women and young people are the resource for such a dialogue.
Great, thank you, Gordana. Donika, please.
So I think reconciliation is needed in the region, but reconciliation is based on truth and on future projects. So reconciliation without the truth is simply impossible. And that's why the people in Kosovo have decided years ago that their only way, only alternative is the way in the EU, not because of the euros, not because of the money you get from them, but because we share the same values, the same principles. And if we stick to these values and principles that the EU and the past of the EU and the present of the EU has shown us, where enemies are now best partners and friendly countries. So the way is for us, we know how the way is. It's easy for us to go there through, but we need from everybody the readiness to be partners in the region and to be equal partners and not to block. The first step for the reconciliation would be to accept the neighbors and not to put always stones on the way, and to be to open the way to go as region, as Balkan, Western Balkan region, 6 countries in the EU, and then to have our future.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Donika. I would like to thank Gordana and Donika especially for taking your time. I think the Civil Society Forum lives of the fact that government officials are willing to discuss and engage in dialogue. It's not always easy, but thus I particularly appreciate that you took the time, you listened, and you answered. And hopefully we can continue this dialogue in a different format, live somewhere. I'm running out of time. I thank Branka and also Albert, who had to leave us already, and all of the audience who attended and the organizers. And with this, I conclude this meeting and hopefully many other ones in the future. All the best to all of you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.